When analysing a novel, it often helps to have in mind the key scene from each chapter. And for chapter 1, I've chosen the arrival of the choir. This is a picture taken from the first film of Lord of the Flies, and you can see that it's very accurate in terms of the hat and the cloak of the choir, but differs in one important respect. Let's look at the scene to see why this is important. The first thing I've tried to do for you is show how the scene is constructed through contrast or antithesis, represented here by underlining things in blue or red. And these are descriptions which appear to contradict each other at a fundamental level. And Golding is doing this to explore the contradictions in man's nature, the contradictions between good and evil that he keeps coming back to throughout the whole of the novel. We begin with a kind of an oxymoron. The heat on the beach has caused a haze that you can't properly see through, but it's described by Golding as a diamond, something that you can actually see through, that is pristine and precise, and we can use for cutting. It's the opposite of a haze, which is imprecise. Coming out of this is the choir, and Golding deliberately describes it as something dark. It is an image of evil. But this dark is not overpowering them yet. The evil is not yet overcoming them. It is fumbling along. And so there's a sense that this evil could be stopped. And the person who could most obviously stop it is Ralph. But interestingly, Ralph sees it first. So although he's completely aware of the danger, symbolically, although in real life he's not aware of the danger that the choir will pose, he's also attracted to it. He watches it. This could be the alert watching of someone who's looking out for danger, but it's also the kind of watching that might be attracted to the thing it sees, and that's the antithesis within Ralph. He's as much horrified by Jack as he is attracted to him. Then we've got this interesting rhyme going on here. The haze of the beach is contrasted to the gaze of Ralph's eyes. And this suggests that Ralph's gaze is hazy. And this is something of a feature of his leadership later in the novel. He begins to forget the purpose of his leadership. He doesn't see clearly without Piggy to advise him. Golding next describes the choir as a creature. So he's staking a claim right at the beginning of the novel that these boys are becoming more animalistic as soon as they appear. In other words, their evil nature is apparent right from the beginning. And there's a kind of playing around with evolution here, where he's suggesting that take away civilization and what you have is an evolution back to our more savage natures. In other words, civilization is just temporary. Indeed, it's just a mirage. Literally, of course, the boys only appear as a creature, and that appearance is a mirage. But Golding is playing with this and suggesting that what appears to be a mirage is actually the truth. And to show us that he's playing with this idea, he's got this pun again on the sand being clear, whereas we would expect the air to be clear, but it isn't. Instead, it's a haze. So again, Golding turning things on its head to suggest that underneath our goodness, turning our goodness on its head, there is evil. This again is emphasised with the darkness, which is the choir approaching. Literally, they are dressed in black. But Golding doesn't say this. He's much more interested in the symbolic reasons that he's dressed them in black. They are not all shadow, however. The blackness is also caused by their clothing. Now this is really interesting because clothing in the novel becomes a symbol for the civilization. So the more naked the boys become, actually the less innocent they become, and the more savage and tribal. Then they start to paint their bodies and become even more savage. But it's the removal of clothing that symbolises this. They are in the process of removing their clothes, and this is why the photograph that I showed you at the beginning is clearly wrong, as we'll see in a minute. The creature, which he emphasises again, and will emphasise for a third time later, was a party of boys marching approximately in step. Golding chooses to have them march. Remember, he has constructed this. He's not just seeing something in his imagination and writing down what he sees. He wants us to see them as embryonic soldiers. Yes, now they are boys, but they are going to become soldiers, fighting in a war like their fathers are. And this is what school seems to be preparing them for. This is deeply ironic, of course, because the boys are in a choir. They'd be in a church school. Now we find out that the boys have taken off their clothes and they're carrying them in their hands. The only things they do wear are the square black cap and the long black cloaks. The black cap is deliberately reminiscent of a judge during capital punishment. The judge here would add to his wig the black cap when he was about to pronounce a sentence of death. And so these boys represent death in an era where capital punishment by hanging was the norm. The cloaks are also black, and so they are, if you like, angels of death, harbingers of death. But if taking off your clothes is a symbol of becoming more savage, these clothes, the black cloak and the black cap, which are part of the boys' school uniform, strongly suggest that civilization isn't as civilized as we think. The education that these boys are receiving is preparing them for battle, preparing them for war. And this may be a very real criticism that Golding is making of the school that he teaches in himself. Not specifically of that school, but of education of British boys generally. Then the silver badge is reminiscent of military insignia. Some people read this as like an SS uniform, given the clash of black and silver. Interestingly, the silver is again picked up here in a description of the cross, and Golding might be suggesting here that the boys still carry goodness with them. Christ is with them, Christianity is with them, and can save them. An alternative view, however, is that this long silver cross, their belief in God, is just another way of justifying war. In other words, religion isn't a civilizing influence, it's just another excuse to become savage. These are two contradictory interpretations, and Golding doesn't tell us which one we should favour. However, he is very keen to point out the military nature of the boys, re-emphasising that they are marching. This military or martial nature is closely allied to the idea of leadership, and the boy, Jack Merridew, who controlled them. Notice that Golding doesn't use the word leads, he uses the word controlled quite deliberately. He's talking about a particular kind of leadership, one that is about strength, not about providing for those that you lead. This strength is based on hierarchy, and for this reason Jack's cap has a golden badge to denote his superiority, and it certainly denotes his feelings of superiority. Golding, of course, may be deeply ironic here, because silver is traditionally seen as inferior to gold, which makes Jack the superior boy. However, Ralph is golden in a different way. You'll remember that his skin is described as golden and his hair is described as fair. If you like, Ralph is golden by nature, not by hierarchy and social status. However, we can't simply dismiss Jack as a dictator figure. There is something very special about him. The choir, who he has been leading, halted, gasping, sweating, swaying in the fierce light. These ing endings here draw out the moment and show how difficult it is for the boys to cope with the heat, which is fierce. But Jack is completely different. The boy himself vaulted onto the platform with his cloak flying. There is something magnificent about him, almost a superhero character, who seems stronger than the rest, hence his vault, and he doesn't seem to suffer any of the problems that the boys are having. Golding ends the description neatly in a circular way. Jack peered into what to him was almost complete darkness, and what's interesting is that he is looking at Ralph. Ralph here is the darkness that Jack sees. This is ironic because he's seeing the evil in Jack. We, that's symbolically of course, we on the other hand are seeing the evil in Jack. Hey, let's start that again. I think I've got that wrong. What's ironic is that Jack is peering at Ralph, and so it's the evil in Ralph that Jack is seeing. This of course is only a symbolic reading. Literally it's the shadows and the sun that stop him seeing Ralph clearly. Ralph, on the other hand, symbolically sees Jack as being in complete darkness, and that's our position as a reader. We see him as completely dark, completely evil, even in this first description of him. So in summary, I hope you can see how easy it is to gain the A star. We've considered 3 themes of the novel here: the battle between good and evil, the presentation of civilization declining into savagery, the idea that human nature isn't wholly good or wholly evil, but that there's the battle with the darkness, the beast within. All these help explain Golding's point of view, and you'll take a point of view about what he's trying to say. Do you believe he thinks that we are capable of good and therefore saving ourselves, or do you believe that he thinks evil will triumph in the end? It's entirely up to you and your reading of the novel. And then finally we've looked at Golding's method all the way through there. He's using antithesis, the contrast of opposites, and contrast itself, things which are opposed and different, not necessarily opposite.